This is the On the Pony Express podcast, part of the On3 network. Check out all the SMU coverage you need at ontheponyexpress.com. Now, here's your host, Billy Embody. Billy Embody. 1, 2, 3, let me go.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. I'm Billy Embody. Thanks for listening. We've got a lot to get to with Hayden Howerton tonight. But before we do, got to remind you guys, we are presented by our friends at StatusJet. StatusJet.com is where you should head to get on planning for this Duke trip, planning for this Virginia trip next month, planning for those trips across ACC basketball country. And oh, by the way, Thanksgiving's coming up. If you want to do a family vacation, squeeze that in for Thanksgiving and then get back in time to be on the hilltop for SMU Cal. Be sure to hit up StatusJet. Mention code PonyUpACC. That gets you the discount on a round trip flight, and they will take care of you, getting you from point A to point B with a level of luxury that you would expect from a private jet company. And by the way, they're proud supporters of SMU athletics. So again, reach out to StatusJet today. They flew some of our subscribers out to Palo Alto, and we want you guys to make sure that you check in with them to make sure that all your options for travel are, taken care of and really just explored, because that's what it's all about, is flying in style right now. So before we get to our interview with Hayden Howerton, do want to remind you guys as well to check in with our friends at Rhoback. Rhoback is an elite company for SMU fans to partner with for their game day gear. And I can share with you that Pony Express 20 is the code that you guys need to use for your first order. That gets you 20% off. Go to rhoback.com, RHOBACK.com. I love the way everything fits. I saw this one, the new Mustang game day polo that they have. Look, with that 20% off your first order, it gives you a really, really good discount on that. Makes it a little bit more palatable for those. And look at this detail. You got the 214, you got the Triple D, you got the Mustang, you got the helmet, you got the flags, you got Dallas. Everything you could want on a polo, Rhoback's taking care of it for you. So check this one out. It is cooling down, which is why we also want to share with you guys that they do have the pullover, a classic one right there with the white Mustang. They've got the hoodies, which I'm wearing one of them right now with the Triple D logo. Be sure to check them out. Rhoback's got an elite lineup, and don't forget about their shorts as well, and other gear that they might have available that might catch your eye, because they have really everything to get you through fall, even those warm days that might pop up here soon. But the joggers are great. They've got the nice fabric that stretch, and they've got all sorts of different designs at different price points as well. So go to rhoback.com, RHOBACK.com. Use code PonyExpress20 for 20% off your first order today. And welcome back to the On the Pony Express podcast. As promised, we've got Hayden Howerton on the line with us. As always, Hayden, another week, another SMU win, but this one actually means a little bit more for the Mustangs.
A great thing about this program, man, is that, hey, we're bowl eligible. We're 6-1 before Halloween. I think if guys had looked at where we are now after the BYU game, people were just hoping we'd be bowl eligible, period. So this team has definitely been on a roll. We've knocked off 4 straight wins versus Power 4 competition. But this was a weird game on Saturday, man. This was a 5 o'clock kick in California in front of what looked like about 10,000 people in the stands. I mean, we had 500 yards of offense. We won by 30 on the road, which, as we have established, is really hard to do in college football. But it kind of just feels meh. It doesn't really feel like we went out there and kicked the crap out of a bad Stanford football team. But that's encouraging, because this team really can get better and has a lot of self-reflection to do after this contest.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that needs to be remembered is that no team this season is perfect. I mean, this is college football season that is kind of all over the place already. And with SMU, they have played at such a high level the last 3 weeks, really, before the Stanford game, that you kind of go into it thinking, okay, they can do no wrong. I picked this game 35-7, and it was pretty darn close to that overall. And it could have been worse for SMU in terms of how bad they beat Stanford. But I just think in today's day and age, in that atmosphere that they played in, it was kind of almost easy to let like some lax get in. Like I think if people weren't there and also being able to like track stats and things like that too, it was hard to appreciate maybe on TV how much better SMU was than Stanford. And yes, they played with their food a little bit, but I mean, that just shows kind of where SMU is right now. There's a reason why they're 11.5-point favorites against Duke.
This team was far superior from a talent standpoint. And once they jumped out to a 21-0 lead, my wife and I kind of looked at each other of, well, I guess it's going to be that kind of game. And yeah, they kind of struggled after that and didn't really put this game away in the first half. Like I think a lot of people thought that this game would go. But look, I'm not complaining about 3-0 in the ACC, but it was a little bit of an ugly 30-point win, if you can believe that. That seems like an oxymoron. But SMU did go into this game needing to start fast after the bye week, and in a sleepy road environment that is always going to be tough. But that was one of my keys of the game, was start fast after the bye week, especially on the road. I didn't anticipate the Stanford crowd to be rowdy, and they still disappointed as far as what they showed up with. So yes, we started fast, but the intensity did not keep up past the first quarter. We got lulled to sleep a little bit. We let our foot off the gas, and now that wasn't on purpose. Players weren't saying, all right, this game's over. But the play calling was the same, and execution just suffered. 21-0 was way too much for Stanford to overcome, considering they didn't score on offense when we didn't give them a short field. But the next key was to take care of the football and win the turnover battle. And we're 5-0 this season when we have one or less turnovers in the game. And so I really thought that would be the key for us, was just to hold on to the ball and continue that trend. But we lost the turnover battle 3-2. So Kev threw an interception, deep in our own territory. That is going to happen as far as actually throwing an interception. It's Kevin's only second of the year, but he was trying to avoid a safety, and he just made a bad decision with the ball. He needs to throw that thing as far as he can out of bounds past the line of scrimmage to avoid the safety. Or, man, at the end of the day, it led to a Stanford touchdown where safeties happen. We want to avoid it most we can. And Kevin's young. This was I believe his sixth start, maybe seventh, I think sixth. But he's got a lot of room to grow still, and this was just a learning experience for him. Roderick Daniel, obviously, he had the punt return struggles. He was too careless with the football, but you got to give credit to Stanford on one of those. They put their hat on the ball, which you just got to chalk that up to 1-0 them. But ball security is job security, and for Roderick, for him to be able to keep that punt return position, he's going to have to be a lot better with the rock. Stanford was much worse than we anticipated, so it didn't really matter over the course of the game, but it definitely feels like we should have put 50 or 60 on the board.
No doubt about that. And I think you want to play a perfect game, right? Like, I mean, that's, you want to go out there and have that standard of execution that happens every week, and that level of play that happens every week. I think it's kind of a good thing that they came out of the bye, like 30-point win, great, but little like eye off the ball at certain moments. Or I think they were trying to, quite honestly, just do a little too much. They just kind of rein it in and play within themselves. There was a couple moments there, like even as simple as, Kevin having a lane to run, he zips one into, I think, Jake Bailey on a fourth down play, and all of a sudden, that's turnover on downs. Instead of, he could have either tucked it or been a little, take a little juice off the ball. I trust Roderick. It is a little, everybody kind of holds their breath when hit with him back there. But I think this could almost be chalked up a little bit to, okay, 2 week, week off. Everybody went to the fair. I'm telling you, this atmosphere was not you. And they said it after the game. You have to create your own energy. But this atmosphere just sucked. It was so bad for like trying to even be jacked up to play. So I think the good thing for this coaching staff, and we know that they're going to hammer on a lot of these things that we'll talk about, they've got teaching points. They've got things to dial back in and, hey, let's emphasize this week. We know Duke's going to come with this. These are things that we've shown and we've got to correct and get back on the right side of.
Yeah, I'm not calling for Roderick's job or anything like
No.
that. He took one to the house against TCU, which was a huge momentum swing in the game that really kind of busted that thing open for us. So he's proven he has what it takes to be a great punt returner for us. I just want to be a little smarter with the ball. And I think a lot of people can do that on this team. And you can always get better with ball security. But yes, the coaching staff has a lot to take from this game, the good, the bad, and the ugly, which was kind of my theme for the offense this week. And so let's start with the good. And I think of the Happy Gilmore, somebody learned to putt. And that was Kevin with the deep ball this week, man. He had 200 yards passing in the first quarter. I mean, the wide receiver group definitely stepped up. Moochie Dixon took the first play of the game, 87, off of an 8-yard slant. I mean, that was his only reception of the night, but he made it a big one. So super excited to see that. That really jump-started this team. That got everybody fired up right after the bye. Keyshawn Smith, he had 4 receptions for 76 yards and a touchdown. RJ Maryland, he had a pair of explosives with a 38 and a 17-yard reception. We'll get to RJ a little bit more in a bit. Jake Bailey, he added 4 receptions for 46 yards. So this was fun to watch the receivers and KJ continue to mesh last night, and they meshed in a big way. Kevin, for the second game in a row, hit a career high for passing yards, and he threw for 322. That's big for him. And in a game where really towards the end, we probably did take our foot off the gas a little bit and just, all right, let's run this clock out. You know, let's get out of here. Let's get back to Dallas, where it shouldn't be too long from now where we'll see Kevin throw for 400 plus.
Yeah. And hey, whenever that happens, because I'm with you, I think one day it does, it'll be very, very timely, I'm sure, with how Kevin Jennings is wired to have big games. And I think the offense and with the wide receivers, I think we're actually seeing a surge with the wide receivers. I think they're playing at a pretty high level. I think it's just different than what we've seen in the past with SMU having either, an alpha or 2 or 3 wide receiver with a, chuck it around the yard type of, approach. And even though SMU probably would have liked to have been a little bit more run heavy Stanford, I think I don't know this to be true. I think with Brashard Smith sitting out, being sat out the first half, I think there was almost a little bit of a 2 pass happy approach, but I almost wonder if it was a little bit by design. Like they got up big, they could do that. And then in the second half, SMU was still able to control the clock. They still rushed it 38 times. If you take out 3 sacks, they rushed it 35 times. They outrushed the passing side of things. This is a team that against Stanford had a little bit of a different offensive makeup, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing because they got some big explosive plays. I think the downfield plays were so important as far as putting something out on tape and showing that you can do that as well.
I can certainly get behind that. With Brashard being out in the first half, we kind of had to figure out who we are when he's not available. I know he played a little bit on special teams, but we had to figure out kind of what this offense can do if, for whatever reason, a running back, which historically running backs have very limited shelf lives, where we need to know what we can do without him. And I was happy to see our receivers step up. I do think it's a natural progression for them. While we don't have a Reggie Roberson, James Prochet, Danny Gray, Rashee Rice type alpha male in that group, I do think it's a little bit of committee wide receiver room, if you will, where we can spread this ball around and get a bunch of guys touches, where we're not having to throw it to Reggie 13 times for 200 yards in the first half against Memphis, which that was an awesome game. Shout out my guy. I love him. But let's get to the bad, unfortunately. And this hurts because I think this group did some good things, but I got to talk about O-line play there for a little bit, especially in the pass protection. All of our guys gave up more than 2+ pressures except for J.O. Savion Byrd gave up 5. And love all of the guys in the room, but I want them to take as much pride as myself, Garen Justice, all the guys, Rhett Lashley, all the guys that know that this group can come up huge. So Savion and Andrew Chambly are obviously splitting reps at the tackle spot. Savion, it just wasn't his night, however you want to slice it. And I know that their D end, he was pretty athletic, number 23. He wasn't a starter, but he was a freak, according to the guys I talked to. And Andrew comes in, and unfortunately, he immediately gives up a sack. And the O-line was only credited with 1 sack on PFF. I know there were a couple more than that, to where maybe it was an RPO that we pulled and Kevin just got swallowed up immediately. Or, maybe he's dancing around in the pocket a little too long and just needs to get rid of it. And that is things that will be able to learn from going forward. But the positive is Kevin wasn't really hit a lot other than those 3 sacks, but 14 pressures on 36 dropbacks is unacceptable. It was definitely affecting the pass game in this game. It probably isn't as much as if Preston Stone or another quarterback would be in there, just because Kevin is so efficient with his legs and he can escape the rush. But on the run blocking side, I thought the right side of the O-line, I thought they played pretty well. I thought J.O. and PJ both had pretty decent games in the run. And then on the left side, I thought it was just okay, not great. We still rushed for 180 on 37 attempts, 4.9 yards per carry. But there is a lot of stuff that needs to be corrected. Obviously, we are huge fans of Garen Justice on this show. And it is really hard to perform after a bye because you're trying to save the legs of your veteran offensive linemen. They're not practicing as much as they would be on a game week. And O-line is like a golf swing. It's not like riding a bike. You have to constantly work on that to perfect your craft. You can't just take a week off and then hop right back in and be the same that you were. So this was not an outstanding Stanford defensive line overall. We're going to continue to see better groups. I'm not overly scared of Duke, and we'll get to our Duke look ahead later this week, but it's going to be critical for us to perform at a high level for us to achieve the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we don't know what SMU would have looked like with Bashard Smith. I think you brought up a great point where they needed to find a little bit out about what they can do without him. And that's important because right at the beginning of this year, he was your best player, especially on offense. Like, he was the guy. And then he's, been very, very good. He got a little bit, hit with a little bit of adversity at Louisville. You can tell he's playing through something, I think, a little bit. And at the same time, they felt like they needed to get him some reps because there was a bye week. And so how all that is managed is going to be something down the stretch that we'll watch really closely. I think LJ Johnson actually had a really solid game, with his opportunities on a night where I don't think, like, if SMU's offensive line could, block it up well, they were hitting the hole and making moves and making things happen. When they did that, there really weren't linebackers there to make plays. I mean, they even LJ, Rashard, they all hit a couple big ones. So I like seeing that burst from LJ. I'd like to see more of him just kind of get into a routine, I think, in the first half, where, again, just one of those weird games where they got up so big and then they didn't have Brashard, and so they didn't know almost what to do. I don't know. I want to see LJ just get a little bit more burn early to get into a routine. And then I think he really kind of found himself there at certain points once he did, if that makes sense.
Yeah, running back coach Kyle Cooper, he is very critical of himself and his unit. And I am happy to see the progression that we have made from a running back perspective. I mean, obviously, Broussard has been great, but we've also been able to develop LJ coming up this year. And yeah, I think you're right. I think when we're able to block things up correctly and we're able to get downhill on the snap rather than dancing around, yeah, I think the linebackers were taken care of pretty effectively. But you said it, we're going to have to figure out a little bit of who we are without Broussard. And unfortunately, it looks like we're going to have to figure out who we are without RJ Maryland as well. This is the part of the ugly. No official word yet from Coach Rhett Lashley, but just say some prayers for RJ, guys. It sucks that in a blowout game like this that we have to lose a player of his caliber. This game felt a little bit like the Rice game last year, where there's a little bit of some chippiness, maybe some dirty players. I saw them tackling Broussard from behind his knees when he's wrapped up and going down. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that really sparks rivalries. When SMU and Stanford is not a historic rivalry, but I hope we beat Stanford by 80 next year after seeing some of the things we saw. mean, I hope we nuke them back to the FCS, when they come to Ford next year after some of that BS that we saw on Saturday.
Let me ask you this, because a lot of people brought up 10 penalties, 100 yards, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit. I felt like some of them were kind of even it up. Is there some of that, when you might not be actively trying to be dirty, or you're not actively trying to do this or that, but I think, forget who it was that got called for the crackback on Isaiah Wakobe's interception return. You had J.O. With his penalty there. I think there's just a little bit of that. Enough is enough. Let's set a tone and let it set a precedent that this isn't okay what's happening to us, especially when you're up that big.
You're taking care of your boys. And I'm not saying let's go out and have 150 yards of penalties, and it's well-deserved because they're dirty too.
Yeah.
But I'm not mad about J.O.'s because his guy was on the ground and he basically belly flopped on top of him. I mean, some of those are like, okay, I probably would have gotten that same penalty too. But they're doing some things like that. And they were obviously John. You saw Elijah Roberts, John with their left tackle after he baptized him in a one-on-one pass rush rep. I mean, just these things happen. Football is a competitive game. It's an emotional game, but you have to be able to keep those things in check. So I'm not saying that we should have 0 penalties because that is not realistic. Guys are going to get emotional. Things are going to happen. If we can just limit those in big situations, that would be preferable. But you are who you are. You're not going to all of a sudden in the ACC championship go, this is a big game. We're going to play penalty free this week. It's something that you have to practice every single week.
Yeah. All right. Defense. Talk about some good here from the Mustangs. This was really, really impressive. And I know Stanford is not. They scored 28 points going into this game over their previous 3 games. So I know they had some changes at quarterback. They had some injuries at quarterback. But this is an offensive team that is just completely lost outside of Alec Ayaminor.
We handled this struggling offense really easily. I mean, we only allowed 10 points. All of those were off of turnovers or short fields. We only allowed 206 yards on the night, and it probably would have been a shutout if it wasn't for those short fields we kept handing them. And look, Stanford had to replace starter Ashton Daniels. They put true freshman quarterback Elijah Brown into the game. I mean, Ashton Daniels didn't even make it through the first quarter. So freshman Elijah Brown, 50% completion, 153 yards, 1 touchdown to Alec Ayaminor, 2 interceptions, 15.3 quarterback rating. I don't care who you are. That is really bad. I probably underestimated Alec Ayaminor. I mean, they said on the broadcast he has 4XL gloves. I mean, that's like Andre Johnson. I mean,
that's crazy.
Growing up in Houston, he was one of my favorites. But 6'2", 210. He grabbed Stanford's only touchdown of the night. I mean, he is certainly a diamond in the rough for them. He had a 1,000-yard season last year, but on the ground, man, we held Stanford to 33 rushing yards on 35 attempts. So more power to Stanford. They stuck to the run game, but to come away with less than 1 yards per carry, I'm probably benching my entire offensive line. I mean, as a man, we can't get more than 1 yard per carry. That is sad. Our D-line definitely pushed around this offensive line. There were 6 sacks on the evening, 11 TFLs. This was definitely a stat padding Russell Westbrook kind of night for our defensive line. But Stanford is a young football team. They have a ton of true freshmen. The broadcast kept making all these excuses that Stanford can't use the portal like other schools. Well, guess what? Neither can the service academies. And Army and Navy are both top 25 teams. So let's just shut up and accept the fact that Stanford does not have the talent right now that they should to be in the ACC. Maybe they can build something, but it is going to be really challenging in the day of the transfer portal and NIL to convince all of these true freshmen to stay the course and develop into serious players as upperclassmen. That might have been something that would have been possible 10, 15 years ago. No longer is the case, unfortunately. I am excited that this is a yearly game because it feels like we're already hungry to play them again next year. And hopefully this rivalry swings heavily in the SMU side, much like SMU North Texas.
Yeah, I think when you look at Stanford, I think they have a really good coaching staff. Like I do. I think they've got some guys that know what they're doing, that if they're in different schools, with more of an emphasis on the portal and things like that, they're maybe able to build it a little bit quicker. They have to play a long game here, and it is a university that right now, walking around there, I just don't know how you're excited as a football, player, fan, anything like that. I mean, they didn't really have football fans out there, but it's just there's just such a quiet nature, and it's such a proud athletic, university. I mean, with overall with Olympic sports and some of these other ones, but you can't roll that out there, and that's the type of performance and trend. At least we'll see what Troy Taylor and his staff does building this program up, but that's the type of trend as a program where when you look at Power 4 programs now, there are some that are out there that just don't care to be good. They really don't. And that's probably what drives me a little bit up a wall with some of this, where SMU's been trying and trying and trying and catches grief for trying and trying and trying and finally getting it into the ACC. When you roll out what Stanford rolled out from a game day presentation, I was told they actually knocked down their stadium and rebuilt it about 40,000 seats less, which I get, but no suites really. I mean, just nothing to make money to generate revenue for their athletic department. It was just overall one of the most wildest things I've ever seen. And I don't know how you get excited other than the fact of you could go out there and get one of the better degrees in the entire country.
Well, when your endowment is $36.5 billion, you don't really need to make any money on athletics, but it sucks because unfortunately, until something changes and either the university allows them to use the transfer portal, they're going to be stuck in this cycle to where all they really can sell recruits on are, you're going to get a world-class education, which a lot of the ACC can sell recruits on that. And I guess you can play Notre Dame every year, and I guess you can play in the big game against Cal, but I'm really not sure what kind of recruiting pitch coach is using down there. It sucks for them.
Yeah, really, really, really just rough situation there. All right. MVP time.
Big man MVP time. Do have a new winner this week. I cannot give it to an offensive lineman this week, as look, I do think Jo is deserving, but the offensive line is the ultimate team position. I just think we're going to have to perform a little bit better for me to go ahead and give it to a guy on that unit. No pressures allowed by Jo. Second best run blocking grade on the team this week. Definitely had a good game. So congrats, Jo, on that. I'll give you a silver medal, but we don't give out silver medals on this show. So I am going to give it to Jafari Harvey. 2 sacks, 3 TFLs on Saturday. He now has 3 sacks and a forced fumble on the year. He's a critical piece and definitely a big-time player for us in our defensive line room. Plays a big role for us. He's a senior. He chose to leave Miami for 1 year in Dallas, and hopefully he's going to help us lift the ACC trophy over what could be his former team, the Miami Hurricanes. So congrats, Jafari. Hope for another big week coming up here.
All right, I'm going to stick with you on the defensive line, and I'm actually going to go Isaiah Smith. I'm going to go with Turbo. He and Jafari were everywhere against Stanford, and they absolutely cooked. I mean, they really were. I thought they were going to end up with 3 or 4 sacks each. And that was just kind of the night they were having. Also, shout out to Isaiah's dad. Saw him when we were walking into the stadium. He flew all the way over from the DMV for that one. So pretty cool to see how many people traveled. Saw Ahmad's family were there. They were at the epic tailgate. So it was a big party out there for SMU fans. And that is, I think, the coolest thing about this. The MVP could also kind of go to, the SMU fan base for showing out a little bit out there. There's such a good West Coast tie with SMU. This is, like you said, excited about this rivalry, maybe developing this permanent opponent situation, but it's also such a good opportunity for SMU to get their football team, and obviously other teams too, but especially their football team, in front of their critical base, once a year. And that's really, really cool. I mean, this was a pretty kind of surreal moment. I think even almost more so than Louisville, because of how many people that traveled, how many people that were out there, the buzz from all the people that I saw out there. I thought that was really, really cool.
It excites me that SMU is getting a national brand and we're able to travel at the level we are. Northern California is obviously very beautiful. We have a lot of alum that come from Northern California, and I'm a little sad I missed this one, man. I might have to take next year's trip to Berkeley. Billy, you and I are taking the pod on the road later this season, and we're hoping that the SMU faithful show out again. I mean, our good friend Bo Morris is going to be at the Duke game this
Oh,
Saturday, so people are pouring in to head all around the country to see the ponies.
so also saw Shane Haley at the game. He was out there. Not only was he out there watching the game, he was in the post-game press conference as well. Snuck his way in there. So we're gonna have to have Shane on the pod here soon as well to talk a little ball. And there was one other piece. Okay, Bo Morris. You see what he cooked up over the weekend? You
I did.
also had something pretty good cooked up this weekend too.
Yeah,
Um,
got to. When the ponies are away, I'm gonna throw down on the grill a little bit. Made some skirt steak fajitas for the wife and I last night, and then 2 nights ago we just kind of had a chill night at home. Just kind of enjoyed the game, kind of enjoyed hanging out, and a great college football weekend.
yeah. For those wondering, Bo had bacon wrapped venison stuffed with cream cheese and maybe jalapenos, I think, or peppers.
So
It-
when the O-line GA now, Thalen Robinson, when we were all teammates at SMU, Thalen kept his Traeger at Bo's place. So it would kind of be the O-line hangout where Thalen would go crazy on that Traeger. I mean,
really?
Thalen was massive at that point. Thalen, when he came over from Missouri, I mean, he was north of 340.
Yeah.
You believed it whenever you ate some of his food. You're like, oh yeah, this is why. But he's like 240 now. I mean, he is really trimmed down. Happy for the
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah, no doubt. All right. Well, we'll have to do a pod where we sit around and eat some of said food,
Yeah.
game day style, and break it down with Thalen in the offseason. He's somebody that's on the rise. I don't think he's necessarily going to be here very long. Once he gets that next opportunity, I think his rise is going to be pretty quick.
Yeah, I agree.
So, SMU goes coast to coast, 7 p.m. Central, ACC Network against Duke on Saturday. So why don't we go a little coast to coast here? Is it time for the look around the country at another crazy weekend of college football?
It feels hard to call every weekend crazy in college football, but that's what makes the sport so great. Man, it's not like this in the NFL, but in college, teams go down every week. You have underdog stories. I mean, it's just the best, man. But let's start in Austin. College game day was in Austin. Lee Corso returned to the set for Georgia versus Texas. Big weekend in Central Texas, as Formula One was also in Austin. Circuit of the Americas this weekend, the USA Grand Prix. You should go to the track if you haven't been. I am a big racing fan myself, although I prefer IndyCar over Formula One. Do not hate me for that, but I said what I said. I'm trying to make it to the Indy 500 next year in 2025, but Georgia may have a racing problem off the field, but they had no problems on Saturday. 24-0 at the half over number one Texas. Texas was held to 38 yards at halftime. Number one team in the country, 38 yards at halftime. Quinn Ewers, passing leader for both teams. He only had 211 through the air. Arch Manning was also put into the game late as tried to spark the Texas offense, but he didn't do much. But the news of the game is the bizarre pass interference call. There was an obvious offensive pass interference that was called defensive pass interference against the Longhorns, and the fans started raining down empty beer bottles onto the field. The call was overturned after the bottles were thrown, and unfortunately, this sets a really bad precedent for college football. Texas was fined $250K for the incident. I hope it doesn't spark any more of this. It's dangerous for the players, officials, other fans. But all in all, Bulldogs were too much for Texas as they hung on. They won 30-15. They jumped to number 2. Texas falls all the way to number 5.
I'm surprised at how far Texas fell when how quickly they were moved up into number 1. And I know they kind of deserve that bump, but it's just I don't know. I look at the top 25 and it is a strange year. You've got Missouri, SMU, Army, Navy, Vanderbilt rounding out the top 25. So you could start right there with it kind of being weird, but Oregon Oregon is the number one team in the country. Like, maybe that's the Southeastern bias in me, but I just can't get behind Oregon being the number one team in the country right now and Penn State at number 3.
Yeah. It's definitely a weird time in college football. It's going to be insane for the committee to have to pick 12 teams for this year's playoff. Hopefully they got some SMU bias in there, but another offensive shootout after this defensive game, dominance by Georgia. Offensive shootout, Miami-Louisville in Kentucky, man. Cam Ward, 7 games in a row with over 300 yards passing. He had 4 touchdowns on Saturday. Tyler Shuck also had a very similar stat line, 300 plus, 4 touchdowns. There were 5 punts in this game. I mean, every single possession, these offenses took advantage and they went down the field and score. I know we beat Louisville in their own stadium, but Louisville's a good team, guys. Miami had been rolling, and they're resilient enough to win close games. So from a culture perspective, I mean, Miami has done an excellent job of battling back and being able to win these one-score games. And if I'm a Miami fan, I've aged probably 20 years this season. I mean, the games that they've had to come from behind and win, it's incredible. The Hurricanes ended up recovering the onside attempt, and they held on and they won 52-45.
When we talk about SMU and what they've done this season, I think it's so important to point to that Louisville game and say this is a really, really good SMU team. Louisville, in my opinion, is really good as well. I mean, I would, if you were kind of ranking, not necessarily, and this is going to sound probably a little dumb, but like, I think Louisville would beat Army. I think Louisville would beat Navy. I think Louisville would beat Vanderbilt. And I think they would probably give Missouri kind of everything they could handle too. And obviously SMU has beaten them as well. Look at what Louisville's defense, allowed Cam Ward to do. And obviously Kevin Jennings, in SMU's offense, put up 34 points, respectable, nothing crazy. But look at what this Miami defense has allowed as well. And look at what SMU's defense was able to slow down Louisville to. And I mean, I just think this is one of those things where it's not all about the, transitive property and looking about, all these different games. But for SMU, I mean, you've got to be excited if you're allowed to look ahead at any moment of if you get your shot at Miami, because they've looked very beatable this year on multiple occasions. Like, I don't think it's SMU needs a perfect game. They've got to beat Miami because they've looked very, very beatable. They haven't, done all that much outside of Cam Ward playing hero ball to look at like this, no-brainer ACC champion type of team. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, no, Miami has not played a defense like ours yet. I mean, yes. I mean, Louisville, I do think, has a talented defense, but obviously they're not a better defense than ours. But Louisville's 3 losses this year are to SMU and Miami in Louisville and Notre Dame in South Bend. So I 100% agree with you. I think Louisville is a top 25 team by their track record and what they've actually put on the field this year. But we all know how the polls work, and you got to win every week or you're just going to keep tumbling. So let's go to who keeps moving up the polls in Indiana Hoosiers. This game was over as soon as it started. Nebraska travels to Bloomington, Indiana, and this was a murder, guys. Nebraska was 5-1 coming into this game. I really thought this game was going to be close. I would like to see Nebraska kind of come back to their form, but I had Indiana covering the spread, and they did in a massive way. 56-7 was the final. I look at this Nebraska team led by Matt Rule, and I think they are going to reach bowl eligibility for the first time since 2016. I do think that they're a talented football team, but the job that Kurt Cignetti has done for Indiana, I mean, they're now 7-0. They're in the Big Ten title race. I mean, now that Michigan is in danger of not even being bowl eligible this year, the Big Ten is loaded. I mean, it's eating itself apart, but Indiana has been able to hold on. But I'm looking at this Michigan team, and I hate to go all over the place, but I just can't help it. Michigan's 4-3, and they still have to face Indiana, Oregon, and Ohio State. So they're in a must-win situation when they play Michigan State Spartans and Northwestern later this year.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Big Ten, it, like you said, eating itself alive. I was super surprised to see that Indiana Nebraska score. I mean, even though Nebraska, for all the early buzz, has not looked necessarily as good as it did earlier this year to kind of kick off its season, but that is kind of college football. You can have those moments where you can look that good, and you can also have moments where you're going to be in a dogfight, and that's the kind of day and age that we're in college football. But Indiana looks unbelievable right now, and they're getting College Game Day this weekend as well.
Yeah, well deserved for Indiana. I mean, that program, we said it on a previous episode. I mean, they hadn't been 6-0 since the 60s. I don't know when the last time they've been 7-0, if ever. So really happy for them and the job that Kurt Cignetti's done, bringing a lot of pride back to that program. But as we move to the Big 12, man, weird stuff happens in Provo, Utah. I've said it the entire season. And BYU, Oklahoma State, Jake Retzloff, he threw a game-winning touchdown pass with 10 seconds left, lifts BYU to the win as they win 38-35. BYU is 7-0. And I love his quote. This is one of my favorite sports quotes is, how can you not be romantic about this game, man? All-time Moneyball quote. But the more that BYU wins, the better it makes us look. And that is true. But, God, I feel like it hurts even more every week that they win because we were that close, man. We should be unbeaten still, and we should be the ones that everybody's talking about, not BYU. But Oklahoma State now falls to 0-4 in Big 12 play. Mike Gundy has to get this team going. They had so much preseason hype, man. They were certainly going to be one of the Big 12 favorites. And Ollie Gordon, their stud running back, he only has 491 yards rushing in their first 7 games. This was a guy that was a preseason Doak Walker Award favorite and a possible Heisman Trophy candidate.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really impressive to see kind of where BYU's at. I think that win for them is obviously what's keeping SMU out of a top. I don't know where SMU would get the credit, to be up at, but BYU is just finding a way, and sometimes you've got to have wins like that. You look back on last season for SMU, the Rice win, Memphis, those type of games when you're going through a league schedule. That's what you have to do. And as much as we talk about, Miami living, their fans having, gray hairs after this season, they are unbeaten in league play right now. And sometimes that's all that matters. You know what I mean? That is all that matters, actually. So I am very intrigued to see if BYU could keep this up. They're playing at a very high level. They're obviously a very mature team. And maybe that helps a little bit, but they have, they really just knocked down Oklahoma State another peg with that win too.
Yeah, college football, you play 12 games a year, and all 12 of those games are different. You can look at any season in college football history, and you look at one team's 12 games, no 2 games are identical, man. You just find different ways to win and different ways to just stay alive, if you will. If you're a team that's unbeaten and you're finding a way to scratch and claw. You look at 2019 when we stayed unbeaten, that triple overtime versus Tulsa. I mean, those are the games that you have to dig deep and find what your culture really is like. But speaking of culture, let's talk about Alabama. Obviously, it was going to be a big transition away from Nick Saban. So we go to the Alabama-Tennessee game. Tennessee lights the cigars for the second straight game against Alabama in Knoxville. And Jalen Milroe's struggling, man. 25 for 45, and pair that with the fact that Bama only rushed for 89 yards in comparison to 214 for the Tennessee Volunteers. Look, I saw this coming. Kevin DeBoer, super happy after the win versus South Carolina. And I have to compare that to when Nick Saban is going off on his team up 40 in the national championship. And he said something on game day a couple weeks ago, and this is one of my favorites. And there's 2 kinds of pain. The pain of discipline and the pain of disappointment. This Bama team looks drastically different than in years past. And I'm not talking about the game plan or the athletes. I'm talking about how they carry themselves. We have wide receivers taking jump shots on quarterback sneaks. That would have never happened with Nick Saban at the helm. So I understand it's hard to be consistently great and keep the standard so high for so long, but that's why Nick Saban's the best coach of all time. The standard needs to be the same whether you're playing Louisiana Monroe or the Georgia Bulldogs. And that is the next step for SMU, in my opinion, is we have to treat every game like the TCU game from an execution, effort, and a focus perspective. And that is really hard to do. It is unnatural to treat every game as a nameless, faceless opponent and be the most excited team to play. It is so natural to ride the roller coaster. And I do see growth and development from this team, but it's something that's going to be built over years.
Yeah, I think it's really kind of interesting. You know, Tennessee loses to Arkansas just a couple weeks ago, and people are wondering what in the world is going on in Knoxville, you know, this year. And the SEC is kind of creeping in on, you know, eating each other up a little bit too. And this is where it's going to get interesting if this keeps happening. And you've got Tennessee, Georgia coming up. You've got Alabama, LSU that is still to be played in a couple weeks. There's Alabama, Auburn. There's Ole Miss, Oklahoma. I mean, and I don't give Oklahoma, you know, chance right there in that game, but you have so many different opportunities in this league where who knows, maybe there is a one loss SEC champion, but maybe there's a 2-loss SEC champion. I think it was.
Can you say Vanderbilt?
07. Yeah, Vanderbilt's in there. Texas goes at Vanderbilt, by the way, this week. So good luck to the Horns to get things back on track. But it's really just interesting to see how that league could eventually help the ACC here. I mean, if you have Clemson, Miami, SMU that's somehow all went out, and only 2 of them are going to the ACC championship game, I would imagine the loser of that gets left out just because it's the ACC. Right. But if you do have all this beat up around college football, don't you reward 3 teams that went through the regular season? I mean, in Clemson's case, they lost to Georgia. Miami's undefeated. SMU has an early season loss to BYU before a true quarterback change. You know, Kevin played 85% of that. I'm looking way ahead here, but this is this Alabama-Tennessee game is a prime example of how quickly your season can change and how week to week, like you said, nameless, faceless opponent, it's so critical to have it. And it just should make you appreciate beatdowns like what Indiana did, what SMU did do to Stanford, and some of those other games that were out of hand and were able to be dominated. Georgia, Texas. It's really hard to do, and it's hard to do it consistently week in, week out.
Not that the playoff is built off of, TV ratings or anything like that, but if we're going to have an undefeated ACC third place team, they definitely should be rewarded for going through the season at whether that be 11-1 or 12-0 or however it ends up shaking out. I think people are getting tired of seeing the same thing every week and every year. And you see that with game day. Their trip 2 weeks ago to Oregon was terrible. I mean, nobody shows up. Fans don't care because it's the 20th time that game day has been there. And I think the playoff is going to get to that point eventually if it keeps being, a 3-loss SEC champion gets in, where it's just like, man, can we reward some of these other teams that are definitely deserving? And I think the 12-team playoff is going to help, but there's always going to be that 13th place team being like, well, why didn't we get in?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You kick the can down the road more and more on the bickering over a 13th spot or a 14th, a 15th, 16th, and whatever it ends up looking like. I mean, I like the 12-team playoff. I think it gives everybody a shot if you're a conference champion to get in, to make some noise. And it does give Cinderella, I mean, let's be real, the G5 an opportunity as well. And it rewards teams that, like last year, I think Georgia's the national champion if they get into the college football playoff.
Yeah,
I have a tough time seeing any of those teams beat them.
Yeah,
and one loss to Alabama in the SEC championship sunk their ship. And so I like the 12-team playoff. I like the expansion, and it's going to be really interesting to see what they do down the stretch too.
as seen by the second biggest bowl win in college football history, other than the 2022 national championship. Heyo!
Yay!
Had to throw that in there.
Of course. I mean, hey, to be a little fair, TCU did get a win this weekend.
They did. Really boring Utah offense.
And Utah is like, I was surprised by that. I mean, really, really surprised. But this Utah, I mean, Utah offense is struggling, and TCU was able to just make a play here or there. But I guess the heat's still in the kitchen over there, but maybe a little bit better off for a week over there. But
Cam Rising get his 8th year of college football eligibility grant. Just crazy.
Maybe he'll end up at TCU. Who knows? But well, that's about it. Do you have anything else? Any other takeaways from this week?
I don't, man. Just looking forward to another weekend of college football. Going to be a big one. We'll bring you all the best about Duke coming up later this week with another big-time guest. Can't wait to bring it to you guys.
Yep. Fun week out in Duke coming up for SMU fans. 7 p.m. ACC Network. They're following us around all season long, it seems like, and really looking forward to our guest tomorrow night that we'll be recording with. So Hayden, once again, with the assist on setting that up. So stay tuned for that. And for Hayden Howerton, I'm Billy Embody. Check us out at the On the Pony Express podcast. And we'll be back with more later this week as we'll break down SMU Duke and talk with another special guest. Thanks for listening, everyone. Catch you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the On the Pony Express podcast with Billy Embody. Follow us on your socials on X at SMU_on3 and on Instagram at On3SMU. And keep it locked to ontheponyexpress.com for more coverage.